to Psychedelics Today for the 2017 July 4 edition. Probably going to launch it today on July 3, but for all intents and purposes, July 4. Really hope you enjoy it. Today on the show, it's just Kyle and I, and we wanted to get into a couple things related to cognitive liberty and a class we're launching, probably a few other things going on as well. But yeah, first and foremost, we do have a class that will be on sale for 10% off for as soon as we launch this through July 4 tomorrow, and definitely take advantage of that. And the class is called Navigating Psychedelics. What's the subtitle, Kyle?
Lessons on Self-Care and Integration.
Yeah, so it's going to have a whole bunch of lecture from us and some kind of interactive online components, a private Facebook group, and we're going to have 10 experts with kind of master classes on their specific subject area. Could be ayahuasca or integration or, you know, how to party safer, stuff like that. So kind of a well-rounded approach to psychedelics. So it's not just, you know, what does it look like to be safe going to Peru? It's more than that because psychedelics are more pervasive than just out in Peru. Kyle, anything you want to add about the class?
No, I think you covered it. Yeah, we'll go over some harm reduction, and then hopefully, I think the whole point of the class is to maximize safety and reduce any risks. I mean, you know, people are consuming psychedelic material. It's getting out in the mainstream, and, you know, we just want to be that outlet for some sort of harm reduction and safety and education. You know, it's not really to promote the use, but if you are going to do it, we think that, you know, it's good to have some education around it, so you don't end up in the hospital or something like that. You know, you call the police. And I just saw this article about some kids in Tennessee calling the police because they were lost on mushrooms, and you know, you don't want that to happen if you decide to engage in a process of self-discovery.
That's a good way of putting it. And yeah, even if you're just like exploring your personal relationship to drugs and running around the woods or something, because that's what people told you was the best place to do it, maybe it's not the best first place to do it, especially on a full dose. And, you know, there's all sorts of these lessons that we've picked up over the years reading and being part of this culture. And we really want to make sure you're equipped to make better decisions for you and your friends. Probably, we are definitely going to go over drug testing, how to use a test kit. Probably some stuff about, say you bought some drugs in a parking lot, and, you know, you want to use them right away, but maybe you shouldn't. maybe you should just tough it out and drink a couple beers instead of using an unknown substance from a parking lot. Wait till the next day when you can test, or just save up the money for a test kit and be safe. We really want less people to have trouble with the law and with medical situations. And that's really it for us. And we want you to have better outcomes in general. Yeah, again, we're not really trying to promote drug use here. It's just that we know it's happening, and we have to get ahead of it to make sure people have a safer, healthier time interacting with these substances that we know a lot less about than alcohol and pot and what else are people using? It's legal. Nicotine?
Yeah, nicotine, pot, alcohol.
Yeah, what's legal? Caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol.
Cacao. I mean, now the new craze is cacao ceremonies.
Yeah. You know all about that. Maybe we should actually even touch on that in the class. That might be interesting. Just because there is some interesting stuff around it, and it seems to relate to psychedelic work a little bit.
Yeah, I had some pretty powerful experiences with it when I would work with it in the past. I haven't been working with it lately just because the place that we got it from, I guess the post office in Guatemala, shut down. So we haven't been able to get a new source. I'm sure you could really use any cacao, but the stuff that we were getting was pretty good.
And like, what kind of experiences? Is it like, you know, heart meditation? Is it like,
yeah, so the concept is that, it's good heart medicine. So it opens up the heart to work with some of that inner work. It also helps bring blood throughout the body, and so it's getting you energized, and it's flowing blood to the heart, opening up. It's a very empathic feeling. So we would pair it up with breath work and shamanic journeying, but people do all sorts of stuff. They have ecstatic dances. So yeah, it's really individual and unique. I mean, people are doing different things. The way that I learned was from my buddy who went to Guatemala and studied with this guy, Keith, who calls himself the chocolate shaman. And they would drink about like an ounce and a half to 2 ounces of raw cacao. And then, I think Keith would go around and.
Like that was one like cup or something?
Yeah. So a ceremonial dose of cacao is around 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces, which is pretty hefty because it's also in like the raw form. It's really bitter and sludgy. You just mix it with water with, a little bit of cayenne pepper, and, you shouldn't drink it too sweet because that bitter is also the medicine as well. And they would like wait for somebody to have a response, and then they maybe go around and do Reiki or some sort of energy work. So, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go about doing it.
I'm trying to do some quick math here. Yeah, so an ounce is about 28.3 grams. I was like, 3.5 grams? That's not an ounce. All right, got it. So 1 to 2. That's pretty intense. That's a lot of raw, and they blend it up, heat it, and then drink it. Typically,
yeah, you don't boil the water. You kind of let it. Well, you boil the water, and then you let it cool off. So the idea is that you're not burning off all the alkaloids and antioxidants in there. So it's like kind of hot water, but not boiling hot water, and you just mix it in there, and you can season it to however you like.
That's really cool. I like that a lot. Yeah. I might actually experiment with that in some of my breathwork workshops. Maybe I'll do like a small one with 4 or 5 people.
Yeah, I would do maybe a smaller dose because I gave some folks at breathwork, like a ceremonial dose, and it definitely sits in your stomach. It's a diuretic, so you'll probably pee a lot more, and so long breathwork. It's probably not the best, but.
Yeah, full on like holotropic or transpersonal style for sure. Like we want to do a little lighter. I could totally agree with that. So that's really interesting. We'll report back on how that works out on the show. So yeah, we also want to check in with you guys and really want to see what you want from the show. It sounds like we're doing well and getting you guys for the most part what you want, but maybe there's specific guests or specific subjects you want to hear about. We also want to hear about like what would you like to see in a class on navigating psychedelics? Is it more specifics on integration, how to be safer? Do you want hands-on video training on how best to freebase DMT? Like what are you looking for? And we're definitely willing to try to put stuff together for you guys, even if it's on a really specific thing. So just let us know. And for guests, we're really interested in underrepresented people that might be, not getting enough press in the field, but you might really, be a fan of their work and want to hear from them directly. Maybe you've only read one of their papers or something they wrote for a place like Vice or Symposia, but you want to hear from them directly for an hour or something like that. So, we're really happy to take submissions from you guys on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
So let's talk a little bit about cognitive liberty. There's this this thing just keeps coming to mind lately about asking for permission. Like, what does that mean? Like, you're an adult human, hopefully, if you're listening to the show. If you're under 18, maybe don't tell anybody. But yeah, you're probably an adult human, and you're asking for permission to do things. Like, you have to ask for permission to drive a car or a scooter. You have to get a permit to drive your scooter around town. You have to, put in 10 years of work and endless hours of form submission and phone calls to do what Rick Strassman did with the DMT work. Like, the amount of legwork he had to do before putting that study together was ungodly. That good on him for having that kind of patience, but what does that mean that we have to jump through these hoops to do research that we think is scientifically very reasonable? Also Iboga, Ibogaine, 5-MeO, DMT work with addicts, totally illegal in America. Like, do we need to really wait and ask permission for that kind of stuff? Like, I don't know, Kyle, like when you hear me kind of ranting here, what comes to mind for you?
Yeah, I totally get it. And I think with Rick's work, Rick Strassman, that was, I think, the first psychedelic research that really happened after the whole blowback.
Yeah, first post.
So I totally get why he had to jump through hoops and why there was so much legwork to be done, and I'm really thankful that he did do that, because I feel like it definitely opened up the door for a lot of this research to reemerge and to get reexamined. Yeah, I don't know. I go back and forth with it because, how many years have indigenous people been using these medicines? And then if you do come from that lineage, you can't necessarily use that medicine without permission, or you have to work in it in the underground. And is that really fair for people that have been using it for maybe thousands of years?
What do you mean?
I get it from the standpoint. What was that?
What do you mean?
By
like not fair. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, the cultural appropriation thing, and I'm like, I'm trying to be sensitive to the issue, but I also feel like there's really hard limits to those arguments. I want to understand it.
Do you mean fair, like when I meant fair on the indigenous side or from the Western side?
When you said fair to those indigenous people, like I get over harvesting, stuff like that, not necessarily being fair, but there's ways to address that. It's just not being done.
Right. Yeah, I think I meant fair in the sense of like, their medicine has been around for a while, and then all of a sudden they have to kind of go in the underground, or maybe there's laws that restrict the use of that, and so they have to put their culture on hold in some sense, or really work in the underground.
Right.
Because
I hope that's
these
becoming
substances
fringe,
are legal, or
at least in the U.S. Like, I think in Mexico, like obviously the Catholic Church and the Jesuits tried on purpose to kill all these people to suppress that stuff because Jesus was the only salvation. They were like deliberately killing and burning books from these master shamans all over the world so that Jesus was the answer for everybody. So, there was that deliberate approach. Obviously, it's not great. And drug prohibition has definitely damaged them further, these organizations. I hope stuff like Combo or like 5-MeO DMT and ayahuasca haven't been too illegal for the communities that have traditionally used them. It sounds like in the Amazon basin, it never really became too illegal. And I don't know, like I don't really understand Mexico's drug laws all that well, but I hope it hasn't been that way there either. Do you know much about that?
I don't know. I think in Oaxaca, mushrooms might be legal for traditional use,
right?
But I'm not 100% sure.
There was,
but when the Spaniards came over, all that stuff went underground in some sense because it was considered witchcraft, and the church had to really on why they couldn't use it.
Right.
It's still left over in some sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So in college, I remember reading some books about the American Indian movement I think it was through the 40s through the 70s. And this one leader for the American Indian movement, this is like before the Native Americans had legal precedent to use peyote and stuff like that. And there was also a lot of garbage going on around reservations and relocation. But this guy who was a big activist and also himself Native American was just, would roll up to stoplights next to a cop, and the cops would recognize him and just full on start unloading on this dude with their guns. Like unbelievable stories. And this dude had been shot many times, and amazing perseverance and amazing dedication to his people. So, that specifically I think was, where it for sure was unfair. And, maybe another way it could be unfair is Brazilians, like Santo Daime folks, or like, traditional shamanic folks who used ayahuasca in that way in the Amazon basin, moved to America, and their stuff isn't illegal in their church context. That kind of thing, or that could be a way of looking at it for sure.
Yeah, I guess now that you're mentioning that, I'm kind of thinking about it. That yes, there's peyote churches. You have the the Santa Daime and the UDV. It's not completely taken away, I
right?
guess.
Like it's been, permission was asked for over the course of decades, and they gave it back. That kind of feeds back to this whole thing, like, to what degree are we obligated to ask permission? And that's something everybody has to answer for themselves. Some people have a stronger affinity to the law than others. Some people are more afraid than others. I'm pretty afraid. I drove by some super max prisons the other day on Saturday. That was exciting. Gave me some shivers. And then a federal penitentiary on the other side of the highway. It was really creepy. Yeah, it's a town that makes all its money on prisons. Horrifying. I can't even imagine the psychology of that town.
There was a town I think I might have mentioned this in an episode before, but there was a town in Pennsylvania years ago. It was a teen penitentiary.
Oh.
And they were making so much money off of juveniles. It was a juvenile detention, and they would sentence like some teenagers for like maybe 3 months, and they end up being there for a year. And I mean, it went under investigation, and I think, it's out now, but I think they kind of shut down that. But yeah, they were making profit off of kids. It was terrible.
I think I mentioned it on a show before, but there was this ballot initiative this year in Colorado where we were supposed to vote against slavery, which unpaid labor in prisons was the thing they were talking about. And I was like, oh my goodness, good on them for using this phrasing. But it's like it's a fascinating thing, right? Like, how do we? I don't know enough about prisons, but what I do know is they're not effective for rehabilitation. But yeah. It's fascinating about the juveniles.
Yeah, I mean, it is kind of scary to really think about, and coming back to the permission of like, to experiment with your consciousness and to explore that is almost like a human birthright. I mean, what is consciousness? What makes us different from animals? We have consciousness, and to want to, or I shouldn't say I mean, I'm sure animals have consciousness, but not in the way that maybe humans do, having these mystical and spiritual experiences. I don't know, who knows? Maybe they do, and they just can't communicate it to us, or they don't show it. But, it's, that's what makes humans unique, and to not be able to explore that, I don't know, it seems why I get it in some sense of why you might need to ask permission, because it kind of maybe, there's that argument of that it strengthens that to move away from authoritarianism and to break free from the culture, all that free thinking. And that's troublesome if you're trying to keep order. But
Julian Vaney, you mentioned this quote Julian Vaney used from Socrates: "The unexamined life is not worth living," which is an interesting thing. It's in every freshman philosophy course. And, I used to identify with it.
Yeah.
Bradley Foster also recently. Bradley Foster is the gentleman up in Toronto. Hi, Bradley. Who helps run the Toronto Psychedelic Society. And he had this really cool quote. I think it was one of the McKenna quotes that he put up on Facebook about, the reason why psychedelics are illegal being something about just like dissolving social constructs. And I thought it was like a really important quote. I'll try to find it in a little bit. It's like we're at the point right now where we really need to consider why. We have to think constantly about why are these things illegal, because we're kind of in the phase of trying to figure out how to dissolve these things. So here's the quote. "Psychedelics are illegal not because a loving government is concerned that you may jump out of a third-story window, Psychedelics are illegal because they dissolve opinion structures and culturally laid down models of behavior and information processing. They open you up to the possibility that everything you know is wrong. And that is a Terence McKenna quote, according to the little infographic they made. But yeah, there's something inherently dangerous to culture about psychedelics. Culture is this kind of comfortable set of relationships and interactions that have all these rules around them. You know, a really strict version would be something like the Indian caste system, where, you know, the untouchables aren't really allowed to talk to anybody else, and definitely not touch them. And you know, that's thankfully kind of dissolving a little bit. But I even see people in the yoga world speaking well of the caste system, because it's like so it's I don't really want to piss anybody off, but it seems to be woven into the structure of a lot of these Hindu foundational texts, like the Upanishads and Bhagavad Gita. Like they can draw relationships between, like, you know, social hierarchy and you know, lines of scripture and justify it. It's interesting to me is like this whole concept of priestcraft taking out this natural use of psychedelics by cultures, by individual societies. Like the priests come in and they put a ritual around it, around the psychedelic use, and then they take away the psychedelics and keep the ritual, and then they do the psychedelics, and then the priests forget about the psychedelics, and then it becomes a very unpsychedelic society. Which, you know, there's some beautiful aspects to Indian culture, Hinduism, but, you know, there's also some pretty ugly stuff. Just like with most religions, mainstream religions. So yeah, it's almost like culture was designed specifically to suppress these things from a way back point of view, thousands of years ago. Like in the European world, witches who still use a lot of this stuff these days, you know, Wiccans, and there actually are some holdouts in Europe that, you know, have a really long lineage of witchcraft that use plants and in interesting ways, visionary ways. I think we kind of chatted with Peter Schwerstedt H about that a little bit, that there is this tradition alive in Europe that's a pretty long lineage. And these people were killed, you know, by the church and by governments, because it made people, the forest was the church, as opposed to, like, you know, the thing the king rubber stamped as the church.
Yeah. And I mean, it's interesting to go back into European history and think about the Eleusinian mysteries.
Yeah.
And to know that they went on for 2,000 years, and it wasn't really until Rome conquered Greece that it kind of all vanished. It was like the last of the European psychedelic societies. I mean, you know, I guess it is speculation of or what the, you know, what they drank in the temples, but
yeah, absolutely. It was probably, the speculation right now is that it's probably some sort of ergot derived thing. Acid or LSD is an ergot derived molecule. And the idea was that there was this drink that they could drink and go really far out and no longer be afraid of death. I don't know if you caught these references, Kyle, but there was these hints about people later being found guilty of using the sacrament of Eleusis at their homes and parties. And they were, like, you know, looked down upon, or like, I think the penalty was, it wasn't death, but it was like, what's it called when you can't come back? Exile? Yeah, got it.
Exiled, yeah. It might be death too, because I think I remember reading into the Road to Eleusinian that, you know, went on for 2,000 years, but it was also punishable by death to even talk about the experience.
Right. The Road. So
it was kept Hoffman secret book? For
the Hoffman book.
Yeah, I think it was like Hoffman and Carl Ruck and Gordon Watson wrote it.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds
like
right.
3-part.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And yeah, what is it that makes this stuff not okay? And it looks to me to be all about power structures and the power dynamic. Like if you look at 60s America, people stopped caring what the government thought, and they just said, yeah, fuck it, we're doing our own thing. See you later, government. I'm not going to Vietnam. I'm going to eat all this acid and smoke weed instead and chill out on a beach or whatever.
You know, I went into this analogy when we were talking on the Big Chew podcast. Mm-hmm. And I think it is a lot about control. And so, you know, the analogy that I use is that maybe governments and religion organizations, you know, there's this big forest, and the people outside the forest aren't allowed in. And you might have the priest or the leader in front of that forest saying, you can't go in there. There's a big scary monster in there. And only if I've seen it, and I will tell you what it is, and you cannot go in there. And so, you know, over generations and generations of this story being passed down, accept it and go, well, you know, it's in there, and that's just what it is. And the person that finds his way in there and sees it is like, well, this is what it is. And everybody thinks that they're crazy because nobody has ever been in there besides the leader, the priest, or whoever is guarding that. And, you know, people get in there in all sorts of ways, you know, and I think that, you know, it's not just psychedelics that's going to open you up. I mean, you can have these experiences through meditation. You could have it through yoga. You could have a Kundalini awakening. I mean, what really opened me up, as, you know, most of you know, I've talked about it a lot, is the near-death experience. I mean, that really just shattered me. And, you know, I think that is, for me, my most psychedelic experience. And that's what got me interested in psychedelics, was having this experience with me and not understanding what we're all doing here in some sense, or what that experience was, because it was so profound, like being out of your body, having this communion with a higher energy, or, you know, something telling me, hey, you're going home, you know. And what is that all about? I mean,
yeah.
How do you explain that? You know, I found some sort of grounding in psychedelics with Rick Strassman's work with the DMT. I mean, that just kind of made sense to me. If I had this endogenous release of DMT, it just kind of been like, okay, like this makes sense, because I had that experience with psilocybin that was very similar. And, you know, there's so many different ways. I mean, you could be driving and get in a car accident, and then you have this full-blown mystical spiritual experience, and then you come back and start questioning things because you found your way in that forest, and you saw this monster or whatever it was. You go, well, this wasn't what they told me it was like. And you know, the rest of the population questions whether you actually went in there or not.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Like the level to which a lot of this stuff is perpetuated. And I think I saw the first person I really saw talk about this actively was Graham Hancock, when I hosted him for an event in Boston for Evolver Boston, this really cool anarchist Chinatown loft. He started talking about this, you know, the origins of the modern human mind, kind of using McKenna model to explain it, and talked about therianthropes. So like the idea of humans becoming animals, and those being on early cave paintings. And, it's obviously psychedelic was his argument, but then he moves on to like human sovereignty. Like, why as an adult are you not able to explore the thing you own most directly, which is your body and mind, soul? Like, why is it illegal for you to do that? And there's no good reason. The argumentation is weak, and that's kind of partially what we're doing with this show, right? Is kind of saying, hey, these drug laws are not great. The drug war has had negative outcomes. There's no positive outcomes from the drug war that I can think of, other than rich people staying rich, and the CIA being able to self-fund itself outside of the off the books. Everybody should know that too. The CIA does a lot of drug dealing to fund their black operations. It's very long history of that. It's no news. A lot of dealings with the mafia from its origins, and they've gone global, mobile and global. So it's just a way they can fund their stuff, you know. Unfortunately, it's gone that way. But yeah, you know, why is that it? Is the CIA funding the reason why the drug war perpetuated so much? You know, rich people love drugs. You know, what the fuck? What's happening? Is it just a way to keep the population down and afraid?
I don't know. Yeah. I think about this a lot, and, you know, there's a lot of conspiracies. I mean, even that analogy is just a really generalized statement. You know, who knows if that's really what it is. I was really big into the conspiracy stuff a while ago, especially with, you know, the CIA. Not to say that that's a full conspiracy. I mean, there's definitely some people in documentation that stuff like that happens.
Oh, for sure.
You know, but is it about money? Is it about control? Or do people just are really confused about, you know, is it scary to even go into that realm and people just don't want other people going in there? I don't know. I think it's complex question to answer.
There's a book people might check out, Confessions of an Economic Hitman, by a guy named Perkins, who is now kind of an ayahuasca guy, but he worked for one of these big engineering firms that would design and give loans to developing nations. And the purpose of the loans was not to do big infrastructure projects. That was the stated goal. The real goal was to make them bankrupt and beholden to U.S. banks, large banks like the World Bank or IMF or whatever. And the concept was that when they went bankrupt, they then owned those UN votes. They said, okay, you now vote with us in the UN or like, you know, various other continuing debt structures to keep these countries poor and indebted and kind of like slave states almost. So that was really laid out in that Confessions of an Economic Hitman book. I was blown away by that. And that was like a huge bestseller. So not really like fringe conspiracy stuff. It was pretty, you know, well documented there. And yeah, the CIA stuff for sure above board. Like you just have to kind of dig in and say, okay, yep, pretty obviously they at least used to do this even a year ago. So odds are good they didn't change yet. So
yeah.
There was this.
I mean, it's a good business model. You make something illegal, and then you bring it in, so you're making the money off of selling the drugs, and you're making money off of imprisoning people. I mean, it's a pretty decent model if you're in a capitalistic society. And
absolutely,
I mean, yeah,
yeah, and you get more and more war toys to outpower the Russians or whatever. So it's it's something to consider. It's something to keep on your radar that there are all sorts of international power dynamics going on around this stuff. Like there's a reason why Portugal can't go full recreational legal yet. And it's largely due to international pressure from the US, and probably the EU will kind of try to enforce some stuff based on that. But I don't know. Did you see that article I put up the other day? The UN and WHO said that we should decriminalize all drugs.
I saw the headline. I didn't read it, though.
Let me pull that up because I think that is a huge move. And it obviously flies in the face of what the United States, you know, from a power perspective really wants, international power perspective. Headline, the UN and WHO just called for drugs to be decriminalized in a joint release. They said that.
Be awesome.
Yeah, okay. So it was buried in a joint release on ending healthcare discrimination. They said that we need to be reviewing and repealing punitive laws that have been proven to have negative health outcomes by member states. Drug use or possession of drug use for personal use. Yeah, so I just finished that Carl Hart book, High Price, and blown away by the story there. And he lays out really well how prohibition can have serious negative impacts on generations and generations of people. And the drug war could realistically be the number one thing that keeps Black communities poor and keeps them kind of being fringe and not integrating. And it's this fear of police due to drug stuff, largely, And it's just this cycle that's been going on forever, since the 60s. Well, police discrimination against minorities has been happening for a lot longer than that, but drugs have been a great excuse for the police to be doing crackdowns and arresting people in these communities. Like, I'm afraid to watch this TV show, The Wire, because like that's what I'm imagining Baltimore, like they're going to be portraying Baltimore like. And I know this guy was doing all this like pretty gnarly stuff, ostensibly for good, but holy moly, like imagine all the poor lives you ruined. And
it's terrible. And I think like the decriminalization like movement, for me it's not really about like I want drugs to be decriminalized so everybody gets high all the time. It's nothing to do about that for me. It's like the lives, the impact that it's having on so many like minority communities and just people in general. Like, it's just a terrible cycle. Like, why are we locking people up? Why are we targeting these communities? And it's so easy. I mean, we are, like, as Dennis McKenna and other people say, like, we are drugs, and if you believe in that theory that we co-evolved with plants and we have these receptors for a reason, I mean, there's a reason why we like to alter our consciousness. I mean, it's just human nature in some sense. And to sit there and target something that's human nature just seems so immoral. And I mean, easy too, and pretty cowardly. It's like, okay, let's just lock everybody up for whatever reason. Like, I just don't understand it. It's terrible. I mean, think about the people that are really bright and come from maybe a minority community, and they're on their way to, and they get arrested, and then they get all the financial aid pulled, and then I mean it really just messes with people, and it's terrible. And then especially the other side of it, where it's actually creating probably worse drugs. Like, if you didn't like make this illegal, then there'd be no reason. I mean, I guess there would be a reason for curiosity's sake, but there would be no reason to alter chemicals. Some of them are altered because, if we change this molecular compound just a little bit and tweak it, it'll be legal because it's not in its original form. Having all these crazy analogs, and we don't really know what the effects are. I mean, we know that, LSD is pretty safe for the most part. And, some of these other compounds are relatively safe. And now that they've just been tweaking, I mean, it's kind of absurd. I mean, it's cool for like research and seeing what else is out there, but I mean, it's not cool. Like, the other day, somebody posted this video. I think this woman high on Flocka, and it was just terrifying and saddening. What was that?
Is Flocka pretty much spice?
Yeah, I think so. Like bath salts.
Synthetic stimulant of cathinone class, developed in the 60s, sold as a designer drug.
And I just started watching these videos of people just suffering on this stuff, and it was like horrifying. Somebody posted in some Facebook group with this woman just like couldn't control her body movements and just screaming, and it's just like, wow.
Yeah, right.
Like, this is terrible. And you can't help them because they're just totally gone. In those states, they're just no helping. Doesn't seem like it. People were trying to feed them water, get them up off the ground, and their muscle spasms just absurd, and they're just not there.
So the story that comes to mind for me, like, I watched this show, I totally forget the name of it. This guy was going around to different drug sellers and manufacturers and just kind of like interviewing them, and he was in, I don't know, somewhere in the South or like Southern Midwest, and they were doing this like crystal meth cook inside 2-liter Coke bottles and using battery acid and like brake fluid, and they would sell it and they would use it, and that was their thing. And I think prohibition is the reason why they're doing this. If they could buy something for $4 at the store, or maybe a legal analog like Ritalin or Adderall, which is pretty much methamphetamine anyway, it's just an amphetamine salt. I think it's the same effect. Like, they wouldn't need to be using brake fluid and battery acid and smoking it or whatever. Like, that's a clear and present danger to people's health. when they could have something that's pharmaceutically pure for a relatively cheap price.
Right. I mean, the spice and the K2 and all that stuff. I know people that would smoke it because they were on probation or they couldn't smoke weed, and so they'd smoke a synthetic weed.
A lot of soldiers
just
like,
okay. That. What was that?
A lot of soldiers would do that just to pass their drug test.
Yeah. Yeah. And like you have something that's relatively, non-toxic and you make it illegal, and then there's more toxic chemicals and it's just causing much more problems. Like I don't know. To me, it just boggles my mind that we've gotten there,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It sucks. It sucks a lot. And, what if people, instead of doing flakka or homemade meth, they could have relatively pure standard stuff that they know the dosage of, so that they can control their safety and dosage, or this whole safe injecting site thing that's happening now, so people can go to a safe place to inject and zero overdoses when you go to these safe injection sites, and because your dose and you have a medical professional watching you, so there's way less medical problems. I think one way to look at it is from like a purely economic way. Like, so how would you convince a hardcore Republican or Libertarian that this is a good move? And the argument is, one number I heard the other day from Mate is, when the body says no, is that for every, was that right? This could have been When the Body Keeps Score. I don't know that guy's name, but it's a Harvard psychiatrist. For every dollar spent on early childhood care and development, you save $7 downstream for police patrols, healthcare, unemployment, all that kind of stuff. So the better advantage we give these people, the more they can contribute to society, even in terms of just bare minimum tax dollars. So what if you were, an executive, but you had to use heroin, and you could use it safely at an injection site, keep it totally under wraps, and go back to your day job after you did your daily dose of heroin, or twice daily dose. There was some examples in the book of, I think it was High Price, where they talked about, no, it was Chasing the Scream, the recent one I read by that British journalist. It was fantastic. Like, imagine if you had drug users, instead of being marginalized, able to still do their drug of addiction, whatever, and still contribute to society. So they weren't this awful wretch. They were an actual human.
Yeah, and I think that's the narrative, though, that they're an awful wretch. I just saw this article about some place in Ohio. They wanted to do a 3-strike rule. And, I think it's getting blowback, but some people are on board with it, that if, on their third overdose, the police just don't even respond and you just let them die. And it's just like, are you serious? Like, that's just like what you think, because it's like too much to respond. Like, and if you've overdosed, 3 times, and they're just saying like, then, you should just die because you didn't get the lesson the first time. And it's just like, wow, like,
that's so messed up.
Yeah.
Wow.
And there's people that believe that, because people believe that, these people are scum, and, and then, you got to look at like our societal issues. I think it really is environmental in some sense, and societal. And, if you're living in a poor socioeconomic place and, there's nothing to do, I mean, sure. Yeah. You're going to do drugs.
Absolutely.
And, what about the Rat Park study? We posted that video on the Rat Park study, and I'm sure there's criticisms on it, but these rats are in this cage and they have access to heroin or a drug, and they just do the drugs. And then once you start adding more rats in and you create this nice little environment to play in, they kind of start weaning off.
By the end of the book, Chasing the Scream, they had me convinced that shame and stigma against drugs, as well as prohibition, were the reasons people stayed addicted. So if people had the ability to keep their addiction, and keep a functional life, typically people would stop using naturally without even having treatment. And, that was the case with a lot of opiate addicts, a lot of heroin users. So they had this story of heroin user being totally accepted and helped, like even helped getting drugs sourced for them, as long as they injected at home with them, not out in the street somewhere. And they knew that they could like have a safe place and a nice friendship still with a normal human, instead of being like a marginalized person. And it's fascinating. I don't necessarily suggest everybody take heroin users into their home, but like it's something to consider. Like if we can safely integrate them into our lives and you know, make them not need to steal, what happens then? Like, do they return to being kind of a normal human if they don't need to steal? I think the answer is yes. Like if you're a rich heroin user, oh my God, the one person, this is fascinating to me, that Chasing the Scream brought up as a heroin user that no one would ever really know was a heroin user was McCarthy. You know, that whole McCarthyism thing where they would like grill people. Are you now or have you ever been a member of the Communist Party? They grilled everybody in America.
My high school teacher did that to us as a thing, and she didn't tell us she was doing that, and brought somebody up and was like, have you ever smoked marijuana before? And it was like, if you say yes, then we're going to bring you to the principal. And if you say no, well, we might suspect that you're lying. And like, you know, everybody, and she had it videotaped too. So
was she doing it to like bust people, or was it an experiment?
Like, you can't do that.
Like, what was the deal? Was she just doing it?
She was just trying to. Yeah, she was trying to show a point on how it was back then. She was just kind of reenacting.
Oh my God! So you guys were just freaking out.
Yeah, people were freaking out.
Man, that's great. What a good prank.
Yeah.
Yeah, man, it's fascinating, like that kind of a thing. And Anslinger, who kind of like was one of the main proponents of starting the drug war, he like I think ran whatever narcotics group was like the first one out there during the whole like pot prohibition thing. He was the one that actually was sourcing heroin for McCarthy. Help me out. McCarthy. Yeah, McCarthyism, I think, right? Yeah. So fascinating that Anslinger, this crazy drug war person, actually had a heart for somebody that was, you know, somebody he could relate to, like, you know, super anti-communist guy.
That's interesting.
Ostensibly super anti-communist. Who knows? But yeah, man, this whole thing comes down to like, you know, why are these laws in place? Should they still be in place? How do we fight them? And then how do we ignore them if we choose to? How do we ignore them safely so we don't get in trouble and our friends don't get in trouble? And, you know, the law apparatus out there is pretty powerful. And
it is. Yeah, the law is the law, you know, and it's like hard to get around that in some sense. So it's tricky. It's really tricky.
Like, I personally would be, if this drug war stuff stopped, I feel like I could trust police again, you know? Like, yeah. I personally feel like it gives police too much power to overstep their bounds and to do stuff that's not serving and protecting. Like, you know, the drug war stuff is obviously not protecting people. Like, you might think, oh yeah, I got another drug dealer, so, you know, there's 12 less illegal guns out there. It's like, no, that's not how it works at all.
Yeah, especially in small towns too, where there's nothing going on. You know, I definitely know some people that have been pulled over multiple times, and since there's, you know, Chris Christie's all about the heroin and trying to clean the streets up in New Jersey, and you know, there's a big push because there's this heroin epidemic in New Jersey that you know, if the police were suspicious, they would pull you over just to try and search you because there's a huge drug issue, and clean that up. And it's like, you know, living in a small town and then just going out and then getting pulled over and harassed. And it's just like I was driving with a friend who had a he pulled out his front passenger seat because he had like this weird wet spot that just kept happening under the floor, and so the mechanic took the seat out just to let it dry. I mean, it looks kind of sketchy because I was sitting in the back, there's no front seat, and you know, we got pulled over, but also definitely kind of profiled a little bit. You know, long hair, and you know, just trying to, you know, and when we got pulled over, it's just like a bunch of questions. and then trying to say, why are you nervous? I'm like, dude, I don't. it's absurd.
One of the interesting things I learned in one of these books, I have no idea which one it was how a lot of this drug violence isn't coming from drug users. It's coming from prohibition. And the more busts there are, the more that organizations need to jockey for power and, fight and shoot and whatever. And after a handful of years, it tends to stabilize. It's like, okay, group X has control of this market segment with this, this region with this product. And the more busts there are, the more that organizations need to like try to, jockey for power in certain places. And, when a new drug comes on the scene, a lot of that violence comes from organizations trying to have that be their territory. And it's, prohibition. If we didn't have prohibition, we had recreational sales legal anywhere. All this violence would be gone. Like the need to police would just be like pretty much gone, man. Like I can't even imagine there being room for a black market, especially a violent black market.
Well, what's the black market like in Colorado with weed being legal? I mean, there's still a black market, but I can't imagine it being as big, because didn't Colorado just pass a bill to cut down on the amount of plants you could grow because they're concerned about the black market?
I think so. It's a really silly thing. Like I get it. Like I get that people are always going to want to have their own like black market grow and, try to stay outside the law just because there's such a long tradition of that in the cannabis world. I want to stop saying marijuana. But there's this group of people that are going to keep growing and, they've been doing it for 40 years or, maybe they just picked it up recently and that's what they want to do is sell weed illegally to their friends. But it's not huge. Like you could make a lot of money. I think the illegal grows are the ones that are like growing in state and exporting typically.
Okay.
But there are these people that I know who are just like, oh, those prices are stupid. I'm going to go to my friend over here, Jimmy up on the hill. And, maybe you spend a little bit less money. But I think there's something to be said for having regulation because you don't know what Jimmy on the hill is putting on those plants, pesticide wise or whatever. And, perhaps you're able to find somebody like even maybe a boutique brand that does organic, outdoor, carbon free grows. They're not even using lights. So it's 100% natural and renewable. Or I have some friends that grow legally who are doing fully organic, even though there's no organic standard. They are just doing as much organic stuff as they can. And, there's those people that too. And, maybe you buy from a mass market retailer and it doesn't have anything about like, safety or no pesticides or anything. And you end up with that. Or sometimes there's people who put those pesticides on their product, get away with it for a year or two, and then get super fined and out of business as a result. So like the regulation is there for a reason. And typically these people are going to get busted because there's so much testing that happens. There's more testing in recreational than medical, actually, which is really fascinating to me.
Huh, that's interesting. And I think it's good too to like test for mold and pesticides and all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, it's stuff that I never even thought about until recreation and medical started happening, you know?
Why
like
would
mold? You? Oh, wow. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, there's no reason why you would, right? Like what? It's not something we're taught about, especially in a black market world, that, oh, look, there's a safer, better way to do this. Where there's substantially less harms to you and your friends, just like what we're trying to do here, like decriminalization and making it regulated and legal, immediate causation to decrease harms. Even if the harm is a potential cancer 20 years down the line from a weird pesticide or a weird chemical, like why not get ahead of that? Instead of just let this black market thing happen. Because people are not going to stop getting high. Like people are going to keep getting high forever. There's no way around it. Even if it's digital drugs or whatever, it's still going to happen.
Digital drugs.
Like like that light
smoking
thing,
microchips.
Yeah. Like the Lucia light thing. Like imagine imagine what the designers of that could build in 5 years. Like there's so many tweaks with brainwave entrainment or whatever to make that.
Yeah, and then think about like VR too.
Absolutely.
VR, like,
yeah, the first medicinal mindfulness event or psychedelic shine event I went to in Boulder, there's this panel of students talking about drugs in VR. Like, what does drug interaction look like with VR? And that was really fascinating. And there's a lot of room there, and it's gonna blow up. 10-year-olds are gonna love it.
Well, here's a question. So we have all these natural ways to get high in a sense. You got breathing, drumming, fasting, meditation, yoga, breath work. VR, it seems like, might be the future. Lucia Light, or Lucia Light. I mean, why do you think that? Could you even make those illegal? Like, if this was about cognitive liberty and we didn't want people to explore their consciousness, why make a plant illegal but not make a technique illegal? Actually, breathwork I think has been banned at Finhorn, ironically, but I think that was because they might have had a bad experience.
Finhorn, for those who don't know, is this human potential movement place in England, similar to Esalen. Kind of like
permaculture. I think it's over in Scotland. Right?
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, it's like that. Their answer to Esalen. It's pretty interesting. Yeah. So I think it's becoming limited, right? We have this. On one hand, people want to be fascist and really control what you can do. On the other hand, technology is making it too easy. So. Price drops in laboratory equipment manufacture and all that kind of stuff has just made drugs more available to more people. Education is now free online, so you could be a master chemist for free from the internet probably. And there's minimal barrier to entry for this stuff. So you're not going to stop it. And you're only doing harm by keeping up on this drug war thing. And, at what point do you stop? At what point does the conversation become elevated to the point where we can, start making progress? And I forget who brought it up. It might have been Carl Hart. It might have been Jack Davies talking about like the biggest activist move you can do is just kind of come out a little bit or come out all the way about drug use and about your opinions on drug use. And it's taken me over the course of this year, really to come out to my family and to come out online a little bit about my positions on drug policy and stuff. And it's to a degree some stuff about drug use, but not all the way. And, it's been really helpful, and it shows that people are paying attention and people are saying, oh, look at him being open about this. Maybe I should talk about safe injection sites too, or talk about how racist the drug war is, all sorts of stuff like that. I hope that wasn't too ranty, but it's this really complex issue, and we need to think hard about how do we improve this stuff. And Carl Hart actually had this criticism in his book about the Drug Policy Alliance, about how their focus really was on marijuana, even though it's supposedly everything, and how he thought it was just so white boys were okay getting high. Like they were safe for getting high. And it wasn't necessarily about the broad spectrum of drug issues. I think he's kind of like been on their board for a while, so he's helped influence that. Because it's not just about white folks, it's about everybody. It's about people from every background in every country. And if you're a minority group, you're probably going to get beat up for what drugs your community likes. And, I don't know how much the black community likes psychedelics. But you know for sure they like marijuana. Oh, I said it again. Cannabis. So yeah, the disproportionate sentencing, which is kind of an obvious thing, like black people go to jail for a lot longer than white people do for drug crimes. That's absurd, and that clearly needs to stop. And we need to make sure people are aware of that. So that could be a great way to open up that discussion on the drug war with people you're chatting with.
Yeah, I think there's actually a study in New Jersey I saw about cannabis arrests versus white people versus African Americans. And, it was definitely disproportionate. I think like 1/3 of white people got arrested versus like 3/4 of African Americans getting arrested or something like that along those lines.
I saw this really weird.
Yeah, it's just sad.
My girlfriend's been watching this Tom Selleck TV show called Blue Bloods, and I caught like 2 minutes of this intro, and right off the bat, they had this New York City stop and frisk thing, but inside a private residence. The kid got caught with heroin because he's probably selling heroin, but he was inside a building and they did a stop and frisk, like not necessarily a normal constitutional search. And stop and frisk, for those who don't know, is this policy in New York where in some neighborhoods, police can just stop people and search them down and arrest them. And it's outrageously racist. And they're doing it to the black community all over New York City. And this particular one like took it to the next level where it was like inside a private building, not even on the street. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. And I think the person got off. I didn't watch till the end, but just the fact that it was discussed on TV, I thought was good, but I don't think they portrayed it the way I would want to portray it.
Oh, geez. Yeah. And if you're listening, you know, we had Jack Davies talked about the stop and frisk history on that episode. So I'd go back and check that out. It was definitely an interesting history. I didn't know anything about it until he mentioned it. So it was pretty cool. But, you know, it seems like we're making progress, you know, in the scientific world. And, you know, that article that was just released about decriminalization, it seems like we are making this progress, but also I don't know about backward movement too, because I just saw an article about how at the Burn this year, Burning Man, they want to drug test people, like the drivers coming in and out. And it's like, what the hell's going on there? You know, it's yeah. And, you know, we're getting there for sure. So this headline just popped up for me from SciPost.org. Study: Ritalin use in childhood could induce long-lasting alterations in neurotransmission. So like we said before, Ritalin and Adderall are pretty much methamphetamine, probably without the meth part, but it's an amphetamine and it has a very similar effect. And we're giving it to children without really thinking about the consequences. There's this, it feels to me like willful ignorance about the effects of drugs long-term on people. And I don't know what it is. Like, why would a doctor just say, yep, cool, here you go. Don't even need to look at a questionnaire or anything. yeah, that 10-year-old looks messed up, so here's a bunch of pills and have a nice life. Like, you know, that has long-term, long-lasting effect. And why is that legal if it has the same effects as meth? It just doesn't make sense. And so, you know, I think a holistic perspective is coming. People like Gabor Mate and others who are kind of high profile in that world of childhood development and trauma are going to be able to influence. It just might take a while. I really hate seeing the speed of progress with science. Like the scientific method and this whole kind of like peer-reviewed journal thing makes me frustrated because there's like this 15-year lag time almost to clinical practice, it seems like, often. And, you know, if we look at the environmental collapse situation, it's kind of similar. And that one's almost even more dire than the human one. Like, we can live with some really traumatized folks generation to generation, but if the planet's toast, how are we going to make it? You know? Right.
Like, we go to space, but maybe that's only 4,000 of us. You know, it's not a couple billion going to space. That's for sure.
That'd be an expensive trip to get all billion people up there.
Yeah. It's actually, so this is very tangential, but I was listening to Joe Rogan 2 days ago, and he had this guest on who was saying stuff like the reason he isn't super nervous about climate change is the fact that the rich people aren't freaking out about it, because rich people clearly want their children to have all the benefits possible in the world. And, you know, rich people are, you know, privy to science that maybe some of us don't have. And, you know, why are they not freaking out over climate?
Or are they freaking out?
Some are. Yeah. Some are. Like Elon Musk, his whole thing is largely about climate change, the getting rid of cars, getting rid of coal-fueled plants, and his whole thing about getting off the planet is about kind of having a redundancy a bit. We need to be a multiplanetary situation, multiplanetary civilization for the reasons of nuclear war, climate change, asteroid strikes, and there's probably a few others. Like, we need to be able to do that. And yeah, absolutely. Civil war.
Yeah.
I just think it's kind of the next step. We need to figure out stuff here, obviously, but science isn't going to stop getting us off. I think psychedelics will play a key role in healing a lot of this trauma, this intergenerational transmitted trauma, and we just need to get there. We're getting close, What are we at? 2021. It's still 5 years away. 4 years. Man.
It'll be here before you know it, though.
True. Time is.
I was just listening something about 2012, and I was like, man, 2012 seemed so like not too long ago at all, and we were all freaking out about the world ending, and it's already been like 5 years since then. So, yeah, it seemed like yesterday everybody was freaking out about 2012.
That's true.
And that brings up we're talking about climate change and this and that and destruction. This is, I guess, off topic, but it just made me think about this. So I went to this weekend workshop with this Mayan, it was a book reading by this Mayan shaman. His name is Martin Prechtel. And of course, somebody asked the question. This was before December 21st happened. What's going to happen in 2012? Coming from that Mayan tradition and understanding it, somebody thought he might have had an answer. And his answer is like, all you Christians and the religious and New Agers. He's like, everybody just thinks about the apocalypse constantly, and it's the apocalypse is gonna, like, you're just obsessed with it. And he's like, in our culture, it doesn't mean that at all. Like, we didn't think the world was going to end, but for some reason, like, your culture just constantly obsesses about the end of the world. I thought that was really interesting, because it seems like we do a lot of stuff trying to save the end of the world to make sure it doesn't happen. And I mean,
right.
Partly it's out of our control. I mean, we're definitely influencing it in some way. But I think also wanting to save it also might have a negative impact of creating new technologies and wanting to do different things where you're using more resources than you really have. And do you really need to do that? Maybe, I don't know. I keep coming back to maybe it is about stewardship and balance and not needing to go slay the dragon and save other people. I mean, people will figure things out, I don't know.
Absolutely. I agree to a degree. I don't think market forces are going to figure it out. I think we're probably going to survive. It's probably going to be a rough stretch, but we're going to make it. Probably a lot of people are going to die, but not billions, probably millions. And we're going to get it. And work on yourself. Did you see the recent articles about psychedelic use correlating to environmental awareness and activism?
I did. Yeah.
That's an interesting one.
Yeah. And I think like what I was trying to get at is about just working on yourself and not trying to save somebody else. And really, like, when you start working on yourself, you kind of are helping out the bigger picture because, you're not projecting stuff onto other people that you would be, and, I think this archetype that Western culture holds is this archetype of the hero where we need to go out and save everything and do this and do that. And I mean, I don't think we need to. I think we really kind of need to have self-reflection and think about what we're doing ourselves, and really look inward a little bit instead of trying to fix everybody else's problems.
Think globally, act locally. Permaculture has this idea of zones of design, and zone 0 is a pretty important part of permaculture, and that's yourself. Like, how do you personally fit into that design that you're working on, or how does that individual that you're designing for fit in? And Yeah, day-to-day stuff like daily practice, like meditation, yoga, tai chi, whatever kind of contemplative practice you have, like that kind of stuff helps tie you into a more healthy state to then have better interactions, more effective and more informed interactions with the world. Instead of working 200 hours, maybe you can do what you really need to do in 20 minutes, and have a way bigger impact. And it's this, like those parables about Zen masters, like blowing people's minds with just like a little tap, or for instance, this guru that Stan Grof kind of had some interactions with. I think it was Christina Grof's like kind of yoga guru, kind of Kundalini guy. Like did something crazy. Like I think, do you know this story, Kyle? He, like put his thumb in Stan's eye socket almost.
Doesn't ring a bell.
So he did something like this, like thumb in the eye socket, and then like the rest of the hand kind of wrapped around the face. And Stan had the most outrageous visionary experience. And after like a minute or two of that, the guru said, "Okay, I will be with you in your work." Like, and that probably helped keep holotropic breathwork alive in a lot of ways. Like having this kind of wild, non-drug psychological professional be able to do something like that to him. He's already been through a lot, Stan, at that point. So like that had to be some sort of third party verification of, yes, I should keep promoting holotropic breathwork and keep on this path and this mission. And I don't know that for sure. If we ever get the chance to talk to him again, like maybe that's a good thing to ask. But yeah, there's some really interesting stuff there. Cool. So we're kind of over. Anything you want to bring up?
Yeah, this is the 4th of July, and, really think about independence, freedom for those in the States, why we're celebrating this. And I think this is why we did the episode, just to kind of freestyle a little bit on questions around freedom and cognitive liberty and the drug war and this and that. And, it's cool too. We don't really get to share. I mean, we share our beliefs a little bit, but it's fun to get on and just chat and get some stuff out there one-on-one with you, Joe. So that's fun. And it'd be awesome to see you guys on the other side with this online course that we're doing with the self-care and integration. I think it's a really important topic, and to really maximize, you might have an experience, but how do you make the most out of it so you're not constantly going back? I really think about this concept of, when you get the phone, or when you get the message, hang up the phone. Not necessarily that you don't pick it back up again, but how do you work with it and actually not get lost in the beauty of everything? Because there's work that needs to get done in the world, and so how do we bring these insights down into our life and actually make meaning out of it and move it forward and contribute to society? And thinking that psychedelics push you away from society, I think it's opposite. If you can have a really profound experience and understand where your place in society is, then I think you're more willing to actually engage in the work. It becomes more meaningful. I don't know. Those are some thoughts.
So,
how about you?
Yeah, the American Revolution was not legal. They didn't ask the British government permission. They just said, this is based on what we understand, what we're going to do. So think about where you're at in your life. You could be in China, you could be in Hong Kong. think carefully about what you're asking for permission for, and what does that mean that you have to go ask for permission? And what can you do legally? What are your legal alternatives, like breathwork? Also, like what Kyle said, like you don't necessarily have to go back all the time. Like, you go to a couple Fish concerts and walk around the lot, you're going to see some people that are, obviously overusing. You're going to see plenty of people that are using just fine, but you're going to see a handful of folks that are clearly, not with it. They have almost marginalized themselves and made themselves ineffective as folks in this world. And our class is really going to, talk about how to avoid that kind of pitfall. Like, how do you maybe take a break for a little while and have some sort of physical practice to get in your body and become a effective, loving, connected human again. Acid might make you feel that way, but maybe it's not really the case that you're that way. Like maybe you're a jerk to the people at CVS when you go pick up your I don't know, antifungal or whatever for your feet. But I don't know how that came to mind. I think I've been seeing pictures of people's feet at Fish, and it's gross. They should be wearing shoes. And yeah, so we just really want you to be safe. We want the drug use world to be safer. And let's just get to the next level. Let's make ignorance a little more obsolete. Start spreading the word. Stop, using bath salts unnecessarily. If you really love them, maybe you love them, but I don't know. Maybe there's some stuff out there that's less dangerous and more fun. And will make you eat less people's faces or whatever, go to jail less or whatever it is. Don't. You guys have all seen those, right? The Florida bath salt. That was like
those are the videos I started watching after I watched this one girl spaz out.
Nobody Google it.
I got intrigued by it. Like I'd really actually want to talk to somebody who's an expert with Flocka and bath salt. So if anybody out there knows an expert or is doing research on this stuff, I would love to get him on the show because it's fascinating. Like, I don't know. It's just crazy that a drug can do that to somebody.
I wonder if it's in that class of piperazines.
Well, isn't somebody at NYU trying to study this stuff? I saw some.
I really want to talk to him. I actually have a draft email. No, I actually sent that guy an email. Dr. Joseph something.
Oh, you did?
In NYU.
Yes.
So, yeah, I've definitely emailed him to get him on the show. So hopefully we can talk to him soon. I would love to. Yeah, his whole study is new drugs. Like, what are the new drugs? Why are you doing them? Like, I feel like a lot of people are just doing new drugs just because it's harder to get safe drugs. Or more safer drugs. Yeah, and I don't want to criticize people for doing these new drugs. It's just that there's not much safety data, and you have to factor that in. Like there's a substantial amount of safety data on LSD, mushrooms, MDMA, a lot of other drugs like mescaline, pretty safe. You have to know like the lethal dose, LD50, like look that up. That's a lethal dose 50 where 50% of the sample die at that certain dose range. It's not always a human they do it on. So
usually mice.
Yeah. It doesn't translate one-to-one to humans, but it's a good stepping off point. Like you can make better informed decisions about that.
I think that's just what it's really about, not judging people for doing that stuff, but just for safety, if you know something is lethal at a certain dose, I mean,
yeah,
I guess it's your choice, but I'd rather not see that happen to folks.
Yeah. It's bad for people individually, it's bad for the movement, and it's bad for legalization and, decriminalization. I got in this flame war on what was it? It was probably like the Acid Math Facebook group recently with somebody talking about 2,5-ion bomb. And this, they were unwilling to really listen about like the toxicity of it relative to LSD. And it's like the dosage is so much closer, like the effective dose is so much closer to toxicity than with LSD. Like LSD, it's like basically non-toxic. You could eat like a pound of it and you're fine. But I wouldn't do that. Your body will be fine. I don't know about your mind. So, it's a really interesting thing. Like why, despite evidence, are you choosing to do something that's more toxic? And even if it has very similar effects, the answer is probably that they like it and that it's available.
Or they don't know that it's...
They also don't know.
Yeah.
So, share the knowledge, guys. Like really talk about this stuff at festivals with your friends. Like bring up that there's resources out there like us, Arrowhead, a bunch of like the Drug Story, Aftercare Project, Tim Coombs. Yeah, I really want to get him on the show too to talk about his.
The psychedelic experience. Experience.
Yeah. Drug Story is a different one. But there's like these kind of Arrowhead alternatives that are coming up to try to take a more data approach to drug research, like contribute to this encyclopedia of drug experiences. And as a result, they'll be able to do kind of like rapid research on drugs. subjective reporting and stuff like that. So keep a lookout for that. We'll have them on the show hopefully in the near future to chat about, their opinions on science and drugs.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think also taking the course, it'll be a lot of great material and a lot of extra material. And, we haven't been doing like a Patreon or anything like that. So it's also a really great way to support the show. If you've been listening for a while and, you want some premium content with some exclusive interviews and want to support this, that'd be awesome.
And you can find the course on our site, psychedelicstoday.com. We're going to have a banner at the top of the page. You'll see a little thing for it. And it should be right above the player. And there's also a button there for online courses or courses. So yeah, if you have any questions, hit us up, psychedelicstoday, email@gmail.com. I think we have a contact form on the site. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I hope that's it. No, we got on Pinterest. We're trying to figure
Twitter,
Pinterest out. If you have any advice, let us know. And if you have anything you guys want to contribute to the show, let us know. Reach out. We're happy to have you guys help us a little bit. We do need some help with some social media stuff, and that'll allow us to bring better guests to you over time on a more regular basis. It would be really fun if we could put this thing out 2-3 times a week, but it's going to take a little bit of time to get there.
Yeah.
So thank you all for tuning in, and really look forward to hearing from you soon.